Good evening, everybody, and thank you for joining us on this May 9th meeting of the British Empire Study Group. As everyone has heard this speech before, but at the risk of boring you and to buy some time to allow other people to enter, I'm going to go through this. So for those of you who are joining us for the first time, welcome. We're an open group. It's not all about philately. We do postal history and a variety of topics. We meet online, and hopefully, if the Collectors Club gets everything together, we may actually have a couple in-person or actually hybrid meetings, but we'll see how that goes. I am going to now turn it over to my co-host, Rob Lutens, to introduce our speaker tonight. So, Rob, take it away.
Thank you so much, Joan. Our topic this evening, Air Crash Mail for the Imperial Airways, to be presented by Kendall C. Sanford. Formed in 1924, Imperial Airways provided wings to the British Empire and represented the British entry in the race to dominate the skies. Countries realized the power of air travel to make transportation of goods and communication between the vast points of the globe faster than by shipping over land or on water. This fledgling airline ran into a lot of turbulence, and the program this evening will guide you through the crash covers of Imperial Airways and touch on collecting crash covers. A few words about our presenter. Ken Sanford is retired from the airline industry after 40 years and has been an aerophilatelist for most of that time. He worked for Pan Am as a manager of passenger services in the Pan Am headquarters in New York from 1969 to 1974, and held a similar position for the International Air Transport Association in Geneva, Switzerland for 23 years. He specialized in the philately of Imperial Airways for over 40 years. His collections have won gold medals in national level exhibitions with international participation in the USA, Canada, Great Britain, and Switzerland. He's a past president of the American Airmail Society and a member of that society's board of directors. Ken is president of the Metropolitan Air Post Society, which is an aerophilatelic society in the New York metropolitan area. He's shared displays of his Imperial crash mail collection to aerophilatelic societies in many countries around the world. So, without further ado, I'll give you our esteemed speaker this evening, Ken Sanford.
Good evening. As our presenter mentioned, Imperial Airways was Britain's first international airline, and it was actually formed in 1923 as the Imperial Air Transport Company. And there was an amalgamation of four independent small airline companies: Handley Page Transport, the Instone Airline Limited, Daimler Airway, and British Marine Air Navigation Company Limited. And the new airline's name was changed to Imperial Airways on the 1st of April, 1924. The first crash from which we have cover recorded, here I'll just share my screen and we'll show you that first cover. This was a crash on a flight from London to Paris, and it crashed at Eltham, Great Britain, August 22nd, 1920. It's the only recorded cover, and it even got a Paris backstamp on it, which was a bit unusual back in those days to get a backstamp on a cover. It's the only recorded cover from that. Although the predecessors and Imperial had a number of crashes during the years from 1920 to 1929, no covers are known from any of them. The next one where we have a cover known is from the city of Cairo, which flew into a sandstorm and had to make a forced landing at Almara, Iraq on the 5th of June, 1929. The aircraft was a de Havilland DH-66 Hercules aircraft, and this is also the only recorded cover from that. The next crash was the city of Jerusalem, which crashed in Jask, Persia on the 7th of September, 1929. All of the mail, about 25,000 pieces, was destroyed. So this is a cover from England to Transjordan, which was carried and offloaded before the crash. This was also a de Havilland DH-66, and none of the 25,000 covers have survived. The next crash was in October 1929. Imperial had just started to serve Egypt, flying from London with various stops in France and Italy down to Alexandria, Egypt. And this was actually 2 crashes in one day. The city of Alexandria was the name of the aircraft, was landing at Mersa Matruh, Egypt, which was a refueling stop on the north coast of Egypt, and it struck a buoy and crashed. The mail was transferred to another aircraft that they got pretty quickly, called the City of Athens, and on takeoff, it hit a submerged rock and it crashed. So this is a large envelope to a cover to India. Most of the mail that we have seen from this was going to India. So this is a cover from it, which is in pretty bad shape, as you can see. And this is the ambulance cover that the Calcutta post office put in the envelope into to forward it. We call these post office covers an ambulance cover for obvious reasons. The next crash was called the City of Washington in Neuchâtel, France, on the 30th of October, 1930. It had an engine failure and they encountered fog and crashed into a hillside. The cachet that was used says damaged by fire, and somebody crossed out fire and wrote flight, which is interesting. Imperial was operating an experimental flight all the way through to Australia in April 1931, and it crashed in a field full of rocks in Kopang, Dutch East Indies. The pilot thought it was a clear place that he could land because he was either had engine trouble or was running out of fuel, and it was full of these big rocks, and so it considerably damaged the aircraft. There was a well-known pilot in Australia whose name was Charles Kingford Smith, and he heard about the crash, and he flew by himself up from Australia and picked up the mail and then took it back to Darwin. And it was handed over to Qantas, which is the Australian airline, for the rest of the trip to Melbourne. There's quite a number of covers from this because it was an experimental flight, so a lot of people had covers on it. But this is a nice cover because it's a registered cover from Alor Star, which is in Malaysia now. The next one was the city of Karachi, and that was also a DH-66, which crashed in Linga, Persia, now Iran, in August 1931. They encountered engine trouble when flying over Persia and had to make a forced landing in the desert, 100 miles west of Bandar Abbas. The captain walked for 5 hours to get help, and he returned with a search party after dark. The engine was repaired and they left the next day with the passengers and the mail for Basra, Iraq. This is the only recorded cover from that incident. Imperial in 1932 started a service from the UK all the way down to Cape Town, South Africa. And on the northbound flight, that was January 1932, on takeoff at Salisbury, Rhodesia, they encountered a spot on the runway or the taxiway where they had replaced an anthill, and the earth was soft and the wheel went into the earth and damaged the wheel. So they got another aircraft. The first one was the city of Basra, and then they got another aircraft, the city of Delhi, and it took off and encountered what they called a black storm, which is a severe thunderstorm. And the pilot had to land somewhere, and he saw a clearing, and it turned out to be a swamp. So he landed in the swamp, and the passengers and the crew were sitting in the airplane being bitten by mosquitoes for a couple of days until the search party found them. This was about 55 miles from Broken Hill in northern Rhodesia. So here's two covers from that northbound first flight. I like the bottom one on His Majesty's service from Southwest Africa. The flight didn't actually operate from Southwest Africa. It started in Cape Town, but this cover came from Southwest Africa and then connected to the flight. The next one was a southbound flight, and in Kampala, Uganda, the pilot landed and broke a landing gear, and the aircraft ran over the runway and crashed and ended up pitched up on its nose. So you can see there's a picture of the aircraft up on its nose. And then here's a cover from it. These are pretty scarce because there were no cachets applied because the mail wasn't damaged. The next one was the city of Khartoum. This was a flying boat, a short S-8 Calcutta flying boat called the City of Khartoum. And it was landing in Alexandria, Egypt, December 1935. The pilot was found swimming in the water 5 hours later, so he must have been a good swimmer. 71 bags of mail were salvaged, and there was mail to lots of different places, India and various countries. This is a nice cover from that, an ambulance cover from Adelaide, Australia, because a lot of the mail was going to Australia. And you notice they actually mentioned the name of the aircraft in the cachet, which they used to do. They don't do that much anymore. This is a nice cover with a label from Surabaya, Dutch East Indies. The mail was all wet, of course, and so in Bombay, they laid out all the covers on the lawn to dry out in the sun. This is a newspaper clipping that shows that. This was a flight that was going from South Africa north to England, and on takeoff at Petersburg, South Africa, the aircraft hit some trees at the end of the runway and also ended up pitched up on his nose. I don't have a photo of that, unfortunately, here, but I did find a photo in the Johannesburg newspaper, shows the aircraft pitched up on its nose after it hit the trees. And again, they didn't put any cachets on the covers. There's less than 10 pieces known, but the pilot survived and he autographed most of the covers afterwards. J. Spafford was his name. This was a flying boat, a short S-17 Kent class flying boat, and the name was the Scipio. It was landing at Mirabella Bay in Greece on the 22nd of August, 1936. It was carrying a lot of mail, and there are 50 different cachet varieties that we've recorded. That's a lot. Most of the mail was to England, but there's mail known to many different European countries. This is a cover from Palestine to Holland with a French cachet, because a lot of the mail to European countries other than England was processed through Paris. So it got a French cachet on it. This is a cover from India to Holland with a French label applied in Paris. This is a label that was used in England on a lot of the mail and from the return letter section in London. This is an interesting cover. This is a morning cover. And it was from the Highness, the Nawab ruler Sahadr of Bahalawar in India to the Marquis of Swindon in England. Interesting cover. and that got a cachet damaged by water from the British Post Office. This was a H-42 Hannibal class aircraft called the Horsa, and this crashed in the desert south of Sawa Wells, Doha, on the 29th of August, 36. The pilot, I guess, couldn't find the airport, and it got dark, and he had to land somewhere, so he landed on the desert. And the next day, they repaired the aircraft, and then it resumed its journey. Let me just catch up here. Okay, and this is also, I think, the only known cover, or there might be one other one known. There's a picture of it. You can see the undercarriage is damaged and the wing is touching the ground, actually. This was what they called the Atalanta class aircraft, and the Athena, and it was taking off from Delhi on the way to Australia in September 1936, and they had confused an oxygen bottle for some other kind of a gas, and it caused a fire, and the aircraft just burned up. And this, you can see the wreckage of the burnt up aircraft. All the passengers and crew got out before it burned up. And there's quite a lot of covers known from this. This is one to New Zealand with a little damage in received in damaged condition at Auckland. This is a cover to Sydney with a salvage from airliner Athena that was applied in Sydney. This is from I think this is the post office in, Penang, which was Malaysia. That was applied by the post office there. This was a short flying boat, the S-23 C class. It was called the Capricornus, and it was on its maiden flight from England to Egypt. And one of the stops was in Macon, France. And the pilot, it was snowing, and the pilot lost his way and didn't have much visibility. And there's some mountains near there in the Beaujolais Mountains, and he hit two trees at the edge of a pine forest, and then the aircraft crashed at the edge of the pine forest. This was, they only had one passenger. It was a woman. So the pilots and the passenger were killed, but there was a co-pilot or radio operator, and he survived, and he crawled to a farm a couple of miles away and got help. And they came and took the mail, and there were no cachets applied. And this is a cover from that. These are very rare. There's only a couple of these known. The next one was also a short S-23 flying boat. This was the Courtier, and this was on the way from England to Egypt and Australia, and it crashed at Faileron Bay, Greece in October 1937. This is an interesting cover. It's a Pakabo cover from Port Said, Egypt. You don't see Pakabo covers very often as in crashes. This is another one. This is interesting. Actually, this flight was going to England. So there's a cover from Palestine, Haifa, and you notice the KLM is written on it because the sender knew the schedule, or thought he knew the schedule, from Palestine to England, because also KLM was operating from there to Holland. And apparently it missed the KLM flight and got on the Imperial flight and got caught in the crash. I've seen another cover from this also with that KLM written on it from the Imperial crash. There's another one from Palestine to Czechoslovakia, which is quite unusual. This was another flying boat, S-23 flying boat, the Sinus, and that was going to England from Australia, and that crashed in Brindisi, Italy, in December 1937. When taking off in a choppy sea, the captain inadvertently set the flaps fully down, causing the aircraft to bounce off the water. So it dropped with a splash, bounced up again, and after rising 20 to 30 feet, it dropped nose down, and the aircraft overturned and sank. The steward was one of the passengers were killed. 5 passengers were injured, including the governor director of Imperial Airways, Air Marshal Sir John Salmond. He was quite well known in English aviation circles. An inquiry later blamed the pilot for the accident, and Imperial was censured for failing to have specified sufficient push-out windows and escape hatches in their flying boats. So after that, they had to have those. There was a lot of mail. Most of the 100 bags, approximately 120,000 letters, were recovered in water-soaked condition. And there are many, many varieties of cachets, markings, labels, mimeograph explanations from the post offices. A lot of mail recovered from that. Here's a label from the London Mount Pleasant post office, the return letter section. That return letter section did process a lot of mail from these different crashes. Here's an ambulance cover from that Mount Pleasant post office. The next crash was on November 27, 1938. It was going from England to Australia, and it was supposed to land in Iraq on a lake called Habania, and it crashed on the lake. And it was carrying a heavy load of Christmas mail because it was just before Christmas. And what happened, it was a severe sandstorm and in the dark, and the aircraft struck the water too hard and crashed on the lake. This also was carrying a lot of mail, about 80 bags or 800 pounds. It was scattered across the lake, and it was salvaged by the Royal Air Force, who were there nearby, in water-soaked conditions, and many of the covers had the stamps soaked off. To assist the salvage, Imperial Airways staff came out from Basra. They were accompanied by some GPO personnel who were not pleased to find the RAF people drying out the mail. By the 30th of November, 18 mail bags had been recovered, and there are many different cachets, labels, markings, and mimeograph explanations used by the post offices at the various destinations. This is a nice cover. I love this cachet, salvaged ex Calpurnia. That was applied in Hobart, Tasmania. And then it has a little written explanation up on the flap, a typed explanation by the postmaster. Here's another cover from to Perth, Australia, with a label from the post office. This was a northbound C-class flying boat from South Africa to England. This was on March 15th, 1939. The name was the Corsair, and it also was getting low on fuel. It was getting dark. The pilot got lost, and so he saw this little strip of water, which was actually near Fargi, Belgian Congo, and just on the eastern edge of the Belgian Congo. And he landed and hit a submerged rock and tore open the hull. And it was supposed to land at Juba, Sudan, which is not too far from there. So what happened is it took over 4 months and great effort to repair the aircraft. Short sent people down to help with the recovery and repairing the aircraft. And there was a local, I think he was Belgian, probably a missionary or something. He got a lot of local laborers to help. They had to actually build a dam out of logs and boulders so that the surface area of this little river was bigger, so they had more space to take off eventually. They had all kinds of problems. And then finally they had it ready, and the original pilot that was on the first crash, he took off and they hit another submerged rock and tore open the hull. So they sent him home, and they repaired that and sent another pilot down. And finally, after about 4 months, he took off. And this aircraft, they had to strip out everything inside to make it as light as possible. And he finally got it out of there, and they still flew that aircraft all through the Second World War. And there was a book written about this a few years ago, which I still have some copies if anybody's interested. It was called Corsairville, because they actually built a little village there for all the workers and the repair team and so on, where there hadn't been any village there before. There's a picture of it after landing in the river and hitting the submerged rock. These are interesting covers. I love this one here from Siegel's Kosher Butchery in Johannesburg. And when I did a display of these covers in South Africa back in the 80s or 90s, and the guys in the audience said, "Oh yeah, that Siegel's Butcher is still there." Here's another cover from South Africa to Paraguay, which is quite an unusual destination. And the cachet is in French because the mail was processed in Paris. This was an interesting one. This was going from Australia to England, and it was landing in Calcutta, India, and it crashed just offshore from Calcutta. The name was the Centurion, and this was also a short flying boat. And just find my notes here. Hold on. So the post office, they had these illiterate clerks, and they used what we call a John Bull rubber stamp set to make the cachet. So you find the name of the aircraft was Centurion. You see on the right, it's spelled Centuria. The one on the left, you'll see the D is backwards. You have upside down letters. The S is upside down. You find backwards letters, all kinds of things like that. And it was carrying a lot of mail. There's a lot of mail known from this. There's a newspaper clipping that shows the aircraft in the water with the passengers and crew up on the tail. And just before it sank, a boat came out and rescued them. And just before it sank, and you see the photo on the right shows it after they were rescued and just before it sank. This is a quite interesting one. This was a land plane, not a flying boat. This was going from Hong Kong to Bangkok, and it was called the Dardanus. And they were flying over a Chinese island called Waichao, which was occupied by the Japanese. And the Japanese fighters went up and started shooting at it. And it ended up, the pilot was able to land on that island after about 80 bullet holes were in the aircraft, but none of them hit anything critical. And England wasn't yet at war with Japan, so they made a big protest. And after 3 or 4 days of diplomatic negotiations, they let the pilot fly back to Hong Kong with the passengers. And he had to patch up as many of the holes as he could with, I don't know what he used, but he didn't probably have much to use to patch it up. And there's only about 3 pieces of mail known from this. This is a cover from Hong Kong to Suva in the Pacific, in the Fiji Islands. which is really unusual, and it has an interesting label cachet. This is a cover. It's in the National Library of Australia in Canberra. And when they sorted out the mail in Sydney, this one came out with shows a bullet hole just above the stamps. That's the only one that we've seen with a bullet hole in it. There you can see the shot up aircraft. You can see some of the holes in the side of the aircraft. So that was the last Imperial crash that we know we have covers from. In March 1940, Imperial merged with the then British Airways, which was flying to Northern Europe, and it became British Overseas Airways Corporation, BOAC. And that later became the current British Airways. In 2003, I published a book on air crash mail of Imperial Airways. There's the front cover showing the Scipio crash in Crete. That's now out of print. I think I have one copy left. And that was published by the Rossiter Trust Fund in England. They publish postal history books. And a big project that I worked on for the last, I don't know, maybe 10 years was combining the two major crash cover references. The main one was Recovered Mail by Henry Neerink. He was a Belgian, and he did 2-volume work on crash mail worldwide, except for the US and Canada and Mexico. And then the other major reference was the American Airmail Catalog, the 6th edition, volume 1, which listed all of the US, Canada, and Mexico crashes. And we've combined this now into Air Crash Mail of the World. It's not a book because it's 2,300 pages, and it would be way too expensive as a printed book. And it has 1,600 illustrations of cachets and covers in color. So it's on a flash drive. So this is a credit card size, has a little push-out thing that you can plug into your USB drive. And this is now available from me. And I think my email will be shown at the end. So if you want to order, you can order it from me. This just costs $30 plus postage. We also have a society of air crash collectors. It's called the Wreck and Crash Mail Society. We have a quarterly journal called La Catastrophe, which is French for the catastrophe. The original editor lived in New Orleans, so that's why he used the French title. This is a sample of one of our most recent issues. It doesn't show an Imperial crash. This was the Cathay Pacific crash in Hong Kong. So this society, we collect air crash mail, train wrecks, shipwrecks, terrorism, natural disasters, all sorts of things that can happen to mail. And that's it.
Wow.
Oh, that was wonderful, Ken. Very, very interesting material. We have a question from Jack Thorer. The cover that you showed from Petersburg, South Africa, has a British postage stamp on it, not a South African stamp. Why would that be?
I'm not sure, because my understanding was going northbound from Cape Town to London. It could be, maybe I'm wrong, it could have been going southbound if it had a British stamp. I didn't notice that. I have to check that. Maybe I'm wrong.
Duncan Barber said that the flight to Australia from April 1931, the cover that you showed, how did it get from Alexandria to Cairo?
I'm not sure, because they were using flying boats, and so they didn't serve Cairo. They only served Alexandria, which was on the Mediterranean. There may have been an Egyptian airline at that time, or otherwise it went by train. I think it probably went by train to Cairo.
All right. Richard Kohlberg's got a great question. Many covers bear no crash identification. How do you know they were involved in a crash?
You can tell from the
Great display.
yeah, the postmark date usually, and sometimes there's a back stamp, but it's generally the postmark date you can tell.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. Michael Jones asks if you can provide a little more information about the imperial route structure, like the global reach, which continents, countries served, and et
Yeah,
cetera.
okay, yeah, I probably should have shown a map of that, but okay, originally they served Paris, Basel, Switzerland, um, I think Belgium and Holland. And then they started branching out. Well, they extended then down to Alexandria through France and Italy. And that was 1929. Then in 31, 32, they went all the way down the east coast of Africa. So Egypt, Sudan, Mozambique, South Africa, and that way. And then in 31, then they extended to India, all the way across through Malaysia, Indonesia, and then down to Australia. They never went to New Zealand. All the services between Australia and New Zealand were from a New Zealand airline. And that was basically their route structure. Oh, and they also, in the 30s, they've had a cross Africa route from Sudan across to Nigeria and a couple of countries on the west coast of Africa. That we do have some crashes, a couple of crashes from those flights, but I just didn't include everything.
Okay. Guy Sides asks us, how does the safety record of Imperial compare to the other airlines of the time?
I would say it wasn't very good. The pilots were relatively inexperienced on the aircraft types they were flying. Flying boats were very tricky to fly and land. Quite often, if you had certain like very calm weather conditions, no wind, you could misjudge your height above the water and hit the water too hard. That happened quite often. Africa, they had a lot of really bad weather with severe thunderstorms, what they called black storms. That caused some crashes. So it was a variety of reasons, but they did have a lot of crashes for the number of flights that they had.
Okay.
I don't know how it compared with other airlines at the time. Probably no better, no worse.
Right. Jerry Petrowski reminds us that ambulance covers, as mentioned by you, Ken, also have the nickname of body bags.
Yeah, right. But we don't usually call them that. Because
Yeah.
because more recently the U.S. Postal Service puts the covers into a clear plastic thing, and then we call that a body bag.
Oh, okay.
And the other
Keeps
thing
it
is,
different.
as you saw the name of the aircraft in a lot of the cachets, well, post offices don't do that anymore. Probably that ended in the 40s. And now, for example, the U.S. Post Office just says damaged and handling in the Postal Service. They would never put the name of the aircraft or the airline. And a lot of crashes, the cachets even mention the name of the airline in the early days.
Yeah. Probably some litigation there.
Oh, yeah, you'd have a problem nowadays.
Yeah, right. Okay, that's the last of the questions that we've got that were submitted. Now, Peter Winger, you're in the queue here.
No, hello there. Just to confirm that the Artemis crash at Petersburg in February 1936 was definitely a southbound flight from the UK to South Africa,
Okay,
hence a cover from England.
yeah, sorry, that was my mistake. Yeah, that explains the British stamp on it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Thanks for that, Peter. David Ball.
Yeah, hi, Ken. What a wonderful job. I wanted to know, in terms of how we define something being crash mail or interrupted mail, there are things that are clearly crash mail. The airplane disintegrates, people get killed, you know, the mail is delayed. But is there any discussion? Is there any debate about if, let's say, an airplane were to crash at the airfield and the mail was not delayed or it was not damaged? Or, I mean, are there current debates about what constitutes crash mail?
Well, yeah, there have been. And in the air crash mail of the world, we defined what a crash is. And just without, I'd have to pull it up and read it to you. But basically, we considered a crash if the aircraft is damaged and can't continue on. If it just has a forced landing because it ran out of fuel or bad weather, but the aircraft isn't damaged, we don't consider that a crash.
Okay, thank you.
Dave, you're still involved with the Airmail Society, aren't you?
Yeah,
We are, yeah. Ken and I are working on that pretty hard.
David is the president. I'm on the board of directors. And I was the president back in 1986, 87, long time ago.
And they have great parties, by the way.
Well, I think Celine's on here. She's our party planner, so great.
Is that an incentive to join?
It should be.
Okay.
Yeah, so if anybody's interested in getting a copy of the Air Crash Mail of the World or joining the American Crash Mail Society, you can email me. It's a simple address. It's kaeropphil@gmail.com.
If they miss it, Ken, they could just email us and we'll forward it on to you.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, we have about 75 members in the Wreck and Crash Mail Society. And like I said, they don't all collect air crash. Some of them collect train wreck or shipwreck or terrorism or natural disasters, things like that. We have one member, Steve Berlin. He specializes in all these terrorism and natural disasters and hijackings and all those kind of things.
And his talk will be rescheduled.
Yeah, it was supposed to be tonight, but he's going to talk later in the year.
Yeah, he has part 2.
Yeah.
But fantastic. I mean, this was such a coincidence to have such similarities. Len.
Well, there's one other thing, interesting thing. After one of those flying boat crashes of Imperial in the Mediterranean, the British government mandated seatbelts because up until then they didn't have seatbelts.
Mm.
Oh, and there was another interesting thing I could just throw out. That problem of landing on the water and you couldn't judge your height. Somebody had this crazy idea of having ping pong balls in nets on the wingtips and then releasing them so that when the ping pong balls hit the water, you could tell how high you were or get an idea. But the only problem with that is by the time they hit the water, you would be way past, you wouldn't be able to see them. So that didn't work.
Thanks very much, Kendall. That was an excellent display. I collect the Empire route or the Eastern route, and it's a never-ending source of study. One of the things that confuses a lot of people is the fact that although you might have at various times have had the one aircraft going the entire route, very often other crews were flying it. So notionally, all flights east of Singapore were flown by Qantas, even though an Imperial aircraft might have gone through. And also at various times, Indian Transcontinental did the section from Karachi through to Singapore. So
yeah, right. Yeah, Imperial had an arrangement with Qantas where Qantas took over from Singapore down to Australia, and Indian Transcontinental did some of the flights across India under the Imperial flag or the Imperial flight numbers.
Fascinating display. Thank you.
Hello, Asia. You had you made a comment earlier about the safety record about the other airlines. You're muted. Asia, you're muted. There you go.
Yeah, I collect Egyptian airmails, and so I'm interested actually what was the competition like between Imperial and Masr Airways?
Imperial and who?
Masr Airlines, which was the precursor of Egypt Air.
Oh yeah, I don't know, but I know that Imperial competed primarily with KLM and with Air France, because KLM was flying through to the Dutch East Indies, which is now Indonesia, and Air France was flying to Indochina. And quite often when there was a crash of one of them, then the other airline would take the mail onward.
Yeah, no, so just my understanding that Masr Airlines was kind of concentrating, particularly with Iraq, Palestine, Cyprus, Syria. I mean, Imperial was obviously the hub to the rest of the empire.
Right.
When you mentioned the flight to Basra that ended up in Habbaniyah.
Cities cost 15 and 20 minutes early because they want.
I'm sorry. Somebody said something.
No, it was just someone had their mic live.
Oh, okay. No, it's just that sort of raised some it raised some memories because having been based in Kuwait and known the son of the Glub Pasha, who was operating in Iraq and Transjordan, so it's kind of an area of interest. Yeah, that's
Okay.
Before we take another question, I brought everyone over who wanted to be brought over. If I missed you, please raise your hand. You also are able, if you want to contribute, just you could unmute your mic and you could talk without coming over. Doug, to you.
Oh, thank you very much. I really enjoyed tonight's presentation. Just in terms of unusual destinations, I have a London to Tonga cover. I'm a Tonga collector, as Steve Berlin knows, that was involved in the Calpurnia crash. Big commercial London to Tonga cover.
Yeah, that's an unusual destination. And don't ask me where it would have connected. I really don't know. Probably in Australia.
Ken Snelson.
Yes, it's Ken here. I too enjoyed it, and I have to congratulate you on having a very good first name, seeing as I have one too. Anyway, more seriously, I don't think I noticed you mentioning Boadicea. Did you mention that? It was in 1936.
No, I didn't mention that, but I just couldn't include everything. The Boadicea was they only had 2 of this aircraft. It was from a company called Bolton and Paul, and it was a land plane. It was flying from London to, I think, Paris, carrying cargo and mail, and it disappeared over the English Channel. I think it was 1936, thereabouts, and they did fly in mail on the coast of France, after some time, maybe months. There was one mail bag that was caught by a fishing trawler off the coast of England. And so there are quite a lot of covers known from that to South Africa, to Australia, and various places. But yeah, I just couldn't mention everything, all of them.
Okay, thanks.
And the other aircraft, the other Bolton and Paul crashed as well, but I don't think it was carrying mail. And they only had 2 of them.
All right. Doug Nethercrap. You're still muted, Doug. There you go.
It seems that a large proportion of the covers that you showed this evening were from crashed flying boats. Was that a representative percentage, if you like, of all the crashes?
Oh yeah, I would say the majority of their, probably at least 60% of their crashes were flying boats.
A risky business. Thanks.
Steve Berlin, you have your hand up. I think your mic is live. You could talk if you wanted. Maybe not. Jerry. Welcome.
Yeah, hello. How did the Imperial Airways flying boats compare to the Pan Am flying boats?
They didn't have as much range. And that was a problem with the North Atlantic service, because Pan Am was ready to fly the North Atlantic in 1937, but the British government wouldn't let them because their flying boats couldn't make it across without stopping in Iceland and Canada. So finally, in 1939, the British had a flying boat that had enough range that could almost compete with the Pan Am Boeing 314.
But in terms of the aircraft themselves, which company had the better aircraft?
I think the Boeing was probably better.
Okay, and it would seem that their pilots were better trained too.
Yeah, Pan Am didn't really, I don't have any covers from Boeing crashes, for example, and I also collect Pan Am. I have a complete collection of Pan Am crash covers, and I don't think I have any from the Boeing flying boats.
Thank you.
So anytime you want, I can show my Pan Am, but of course that isn't really much of the British Empire.
I'm sure it has something British on it.
Oh yeah, some of the flights were to and from Great Britain, but not as much as Imperial, of course.
Well, when Gary Powell Jr. came down, we decided that it must have had Lucas Engineering. So his top
Yeah, there you go.
Everyone's quiet tonight. No more questions for Ken? Ken, I had one as a pilot. Is it a little weird to collect crash mail?
It is, but I wasn't a pilot. But a good friend of mine was a pilot. His name was Dowie Ace. He was a South African Airways pilot, and he died in a crash in '87, I think it was, of a 747 off Mauritius, and he collected crash covers. In fact, he and I were writing a book on crash mail of Southern Africa when that happened. But that's unusual, I think, to find a pilot who collects crash covers.
Yeah, that's a little, I wouldn't really advertise that.
Right. The way I look at it is I had nothing to do with the crash. I had no control over it. And the mail that is recovered or has come up from these crashes is interesting.
Yeah, I love the morning covers. Bill, you have a question? Hi, Bill.
Hello?
We got you.
Hello?
Hello.
We can hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Ken, it's Bill Shaw.
Yeah, hi. Haven't heard from you for a long time.
Yeah, that's right. I'm still around though.
Yeah.
I seem to have lost the photograph on the on the camera is playing up for some reason or other. I've got the camera working according to the signals, but there's no picture coming up.
Yeah,
However,
we can hear you.
can I return to the Scipio cover?
Yeah, which one? I showed a couple of them.
The Scipio, that Scipio cover.
Yeah.
Did I understand you to say it was a C-class flying boat?
Yeah, it was a short C-class, yeah.
Yeah, you go to the cover.
Yeah. All right.
I think I read C-class.
That's what I thought. That's what I thought it was. Here, we'll come to it.
I think it was near the beginning, I believe.
The Scipio, yeah.
Oh, that one there, yeah.
That was a
the Scipio wasn't a short C-class.
What was it?
Well, it was a C-class flying boat. All had names starting with C.
If I can butt in, it was a short tent.
Yeah, but that looks to me like a biplane and not a flying boat.
It was a flying boat. There's a picture of it right there.
It was a short tent flying boat.
Yeah, you're right.
Scipio, Sylvanus, and Satyrus. There were 3 of them.
Yeah, you're right. It was a Kent. I made a mistake there. Yeah, you're right.
It was a Kim, was it? Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
So I just spotted it. I thought a C-class with a name beginning with S. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry about that.
That's okay. No problem. It happens to all of us.
Ken, you're getting free editing here.
Yeah, right. It just shows nobody's perfect.
Well, there's still much to it.
Yeah. Also, of course, the Corsair covers. I was quite interested in those, having never seen one before.
Which one?
The Corsair.
Oh yeah, Corsair. Those are pretty scarce.
But the story, Corsairville, is a wonderful story, whether you like aircraft or not.
Yeah, it is. It is, yeah. I have a few copies of the book if anybody's interested.
Yeah.
That's great. Jamie.
Yeah, just a comment on Darby Ace. He was I knew him in South Africa, and when he went down with the Helderberg, he was carrying his collection with him.
I know, yeah.
Yeah, so all that crash mail that he'd taken up to be photographed in Taiwan was lost in that. Well, I say lost. There was reports that it was recovered because it was seen in a hangar at Jan Smuts, but it was never seen again afterwards, to my knowledge. Have you any information on that?
Oh, no. Apparently, they found the collection in the wreckage floating on the water, and it was there in that hangar where they were putting all the wreckage together. Yeah. Then the collection disappeared, and I don't know what happened to it.
Yeah, that's how I understood it. Okay, thanks, eh?
Benjamin.
Kendall, the question I have is when the mail sacks were recovered and the mail was taken out, what was the process of drying out? And were the letters inside the envelope able to be removed, or were these crash covers just returned to the sender?
Most of the time, they didn't take the contents out. They dried the letters in various ways. Quite often, they used a bakery and put the letters in an oven, which is a good way to dry them out in a low heat oven. So I have a lot of covers that were dried out in ovens. And then you have that example in India in Bombay, where they put all the letters out on the grass to dry in the sun. Sometimes the letters were still forwarded when they were damp, so the caches are blurred. So they didn't always dry out everything before they sent it on.
So it was always good to write in indelible ink then, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah, there was a Pan Am crash in the Andes, well, Panagra, which was half owned by Pan Am, in 1938. They didn't find the wreckage for 2.5 years. And when they did find the mail, it was damp, and it was processed in the Santiago Chile post office, and a lot of the caches were blurred because they were still damp.
Well, thank you, thank you.
And they tried to deliver them to the original addressee?
Well, yeah, they try to, and usually when an ambulance cover is used, it's because the original cover is badly damaged. And sometimes they had trouble reading the address of the addressee. Sometimes if they couldn't read that, they would return it to the sender if they could get that address.
What an interesting topic. Everyone's so quiet. That's not like the airmail group that I know.
One interesting thing about the Helderberg crash, the South African Airways crash. There was a guy his name was Neville Polokow. He was a aerophilatelist. I haven't heard from him for 5 years or more. You know how he got a couple of covers? He put an ad in the newspapers in Johannesburg and Cape Town that anybody finding damaged mail, contact me. And a woman who worked in a bank in Cape Town called him and said, I opened the mail at this bank and I did have a couple of envelopes which were probably in that crash. She says, I'll let you have them, but don't tell anybody because I could get fired. So that's how he got a couple of covers from that.
Wow.
Pretty neat. So do a lot of people collect crash covers that are on here? Do you see a lot of your compatriots?
I see a few people, but I think a lot of aerophilatelists, that's just a little side thing. Maybe they collect a particular airline or a particular country or a particular route, and they'll include a few crash covers if it falls into that category, but they don't really collect just crash covers like I do.
David.
Yeah, I don't know if I get a second bite at the apple, but I'm gonna give it a shot. And that is whenever Ken talks about this subject, I'm interested in crash mail, but I'm really a lot more interested in Charles Lindbergh. And he had 2 crashes when he was an airmail pilot. They recovered several hundred pounds of mail. He ended up being a very famous person, and I would think very collectible. And yet, I think we've only seen 1 or 2 envelopes in philatelic hands over the years. So I know I've asked Ken this in the past, but since we've got, a whole bunch of people here, I'm just going to throw this out. Is anybody surprised that we haven't seen any of this mail, or anybody know where any of it is?
Yeah, from one of those crashes, we don't know of any covers. And from the other one, I think there's only one piece has been mentioned or recorded, but we don't know who owns it.
Yeah.
Oh.
How would you identify it, David?
Well, I mean, what Ken said is that even if an envelope doesn't have an auxiliary marking on it, if you knew, let's say you saw in the newspaper, it said that the plane crashed, you could look at the tables and see when that plane was supposed to be flying, and you could look at the postmark. So the postmark is everything.
Yeah, and also those flights were between Chicago and St. Louis, so it would probably be mail from Illinois to Missouri or reverse, or maybe Michigan to Missouri. You can tell pretty much where it comes from and the postmark date.
Right.
So people could have them and just not know it if they don't read the table.
Yep.
For example, from 9/11, 2 pieces are known which were found on the street in the debris, and both of them are from Maine, because both of those flights that went into the World Trade Center were from Boston. So there was mail coming down with another airline from Maine that connected at Boston. So we can tell from where they came from that they were in that in the 9/11.
Given the extent of the explosion of those crashes into the World Trade Center, I'm surprised that any mail survived.
Yeah, well, They're fairly readable or legible. You can still read the addresses. One of them was pretty badly damaged. The other one not as much. So I think what happened is the mailbag probably burst open and fell. All the letters were scattered to the wind and they didn't show burn damage on them.
Okay. Aja, you have a question?
No, I was just going to reiterate what Ken was saying, that I don't specifically collect crash mail, but as I said, I collect Egypt, and Ken mentioned Mas Matrua, and of course that's interesting because I have a connection there, and the summer house is a very lovely place actually. So that's kind of interesting from that point of view. But just talking about actually specifically collecting, it would be a side interest rather than the main, rather than the main thing. But I mean, having said that, the story about the Belgian Congo I find absolutely fascinating. Yeah, that's.
And is that something you could do, the Belgian Congo? Maybe like in a year?
I'm sorry?
Oh, I was wondering if Ken could do a presentation on that. And
I think it'd be like
next year.
Idea. I think it'd be a fantastic idea. I'd love to hear the full story.
Yeah, there were a few crashes between Belgium and the Belgian Congo by the Belgian Airlines Sabina. I don't have any covers from it because I don't collect that, but they did have quite a few crashes, which are all listed in the Air Crash Manual of the World, by the way.
Ed Wolf, welcome.
A couple of questions. One, didn't Lindbergh parachute out of his aircraft before he crashed them?
Yes,
twice?
Both times, yeah.
And the other question, the other one relating to the first Imperial experimental service to Australia, when they landed when they crashed at Kupang, the Dutch were prepared to fly to Australia at the time, and being in Dutch territory, but the British didn't allow that at all. So they had to wait several days before they could work out how they were going to get that mail to Australia. The only aircraft that could do it at the time from Australia that had more than one engine or two engines was Charles Kingsford Smith's Southern Cross, which was privately owned. So he was chartered to fly it to Australia. That's how it went. But the interesting thing, I think, is the politics between the fact that the Dutch were able to do it, could have done it, but were not allowed to do so. Thought you'd like to know that one.
Yeah, I didn't know that was the reason why he came and got the mail.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
That's it. We're all talked out.
Joan?
Yes. Oh, Rich. I knew there was more here.
I used to see a lot of references or photographs from the crash, the explosion of the Hindenburg. How can Ken elucidate us on that crash?
Well, that was 1937 in Lakehurst, New Jersey. The anniversary of that was just a few days ago. They still don't know what caused the explosion of the airship. There's various theories. There's been a number of TV shows that go into it, but they still don't know for sure. About 287 pieces of mail were recovered. They were all recorded by the New York City Post Office with the name and address of the addressees and all that. There was a book written by a German guy named Dieter something, I can't think of his last name, a few years ago, And that listed every known cover. It also lists the counterfeits because there's a few counterfeits of those because they've been selling for, they have sold for as much as $15,000 each. Right now, the market is not that good, so now they go for maybe 8,000. I mean, they're not scarce or rare because there were so many pieces recovered, but it's because there's such a demand for Zeppelin mail that's why they sell for that much.
Yeah, and actually there were 17,000 pieces of mail carried on the flight.
Yeah, right. Yeah, but most of it burned up. And there's a few fakes. It's easy to tell a fake because normally the covers were in bundles. So the fire damage would be normally around the edges and not on the surface of the middle of the cover. And some of the fakes, the faker has made it look like fire damage across the whole cover, or stuck a post office ceiling label in the middle of the cover, which they would never have done. They would only put it on the edges to keep the contents from falling out. So you can spot a fake Hindenburg cover pretty easily. And it's interesting that when they show up in a major auction house auction, whoever spots it notifies the auction house that it's a fake, and they usually withdraw it, and then it turns up a year or two later in another major auction.
Keep trying.
I saw a cartoon whereby the captain of the Hindenburg lit a celebratory cigar.
Yeah. Well, you know why it turns up in other auctions, don't you?
That's because somebody bought it and paid money for it, and they don't want to lose their money.
Well, no, generally speaking, the auction, any good auction house would say it's a forgery or withdraw it. But when you do that, you have to give it back to the owner.
Right.
And the owner just either sells it privately or reconsigns it.
Right. Right. There was one on eBay a few years ago, and I pointed out to the seller that it was a fake. He was asking $10,000, and he didn't believe it, that it was a fake. And I proved it to him with other experts on Hindenburg covers, and he didn't withdraw it, but it didn't sell. And I have not seen that turn up again. I don't know what happened to it.
Maybe they burned it.
Yeah, our policy, is that because you have to be fair to the consignor. The guy thinks it's a real thing. So we always sell it subject to certification, even if it didn't qualify. And that way it's all fair. The owner gets it's a fake. All the experts say it's a fake, and no one gets taken advantage of. And, we actually insist upon when you buy something that we mark as a forgery that you get it certified. So. But some people just buy forgeries and then wipe off the fake on the back and reoffer things as real. Peter.
Another amusing story along those lines. There was a cover on eBay perhaps a year ago now, which was supposedly the Daedalus crash in Nigeria. And the interesting thing was that it was posted at the date stamp of posting in Lagos. It was a week after the crash. And I emailed the vendor and pointed this out, but it still remained up for sale for quite a time. It was on for about £125, I think. So I hope nobody bought it thinking it was real.
Yeah.
eBay's gotten better on that, haven't they? If someone sells a fake.
I don't know. I only contacted the vendor. I didn't contact email because I didn't want to. I thought the vendor would just see that immediately and take it off. I didn't actually report it to eBay itself.
eBay doesn't respond very well to those kind of things.
No.
No. I thought it was the vendor's responsibility, but
right.
There we are.
Yeah, I look at eBay every day for crash covers, just to see what's coming on the market.
Did you notice that one, Ken?
No, I didn't. What airline was it supposed to be from?
It was Imperial Airways. It was the Daedalus crash on the West Africa service
Oh,
in, in April 1937, I think.
oh, okay. I missed that one.
Well, good job you did.
That's another sideline. Forged crash covers, right?
I've never.
It wasn't a forgery, really. It was simply the vendor saying it was involved in the crash. It was just probably a genuine cover, but it was just posted a week after the crash, and he just got mixed up, I suppose.
Yeah, I've never found a fake Imperial Airways crash cover, by the way. Or at least I don't know of any.
Ray, you're quiet down there. Great background. Is that it? Are we all talked out?
I think so.
Yeah, looks like it.
It's a great resource. Okay. I don't shut off until everyone leaves because
Thanks so much, Ken. That was a great presentation. Right.